So we're going to start with this bet. We have a couple. We're going to run a Burgis clinic here. And there's going to be a couple clips we'll do in the post game. But this was crazy, though, because a couple of weeks ago, I was on vacation. And we were in Puerto Rico. But
yeah, I was sending you text messages about this. And you were like, hey, I'm lying on a beach in Puerto Rico. I don't have time for this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was like, dude, drink some rum. Relax. It's okay. It was just like, but you did a video for Zero Books. And you've done a whole series. Everybody should go over and subscribe. Zero Books is great in general, and you can watch this whole series. Doug does amazing work over there. But you did this video on basically Ben Shapiro's just his logical inconsistencies with arguments with regards to Zionism.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened?
Yeah.
Did they engage you? Did Ben Shapiro and or his followers engage you in an open exchange?
Yeah, so of course that's what you would expect to happen, that all of the Ben Shapiro fans would show up in the comments and they would make, reasoned, calm arguments. And
as you can see, like Ben shows up, he's wearing a keffiyeh, he goes like C to C and like, he's all about it.
Yeah, well, I'm going to really shock anybody who's watching this on YouTube and say that I am in fact part Jewish, but it's,
I'm legitimately tired of that. Like, no one can indulge in anti-Semitism, right? Unless you're being funny. But like, no one can indulge in like actual anti-Semitism. But I'm done. Like, I don't believe in standpoint epistemology. There's certain issues where everybody can talk about them. It's like if you're not Jewish, you shouldn't comment about, I don't know, like how a particular temple is run.
Right.
But you have the fucking right to talk about a sovereign nation state.
You do.
I am done with that shit, man. It's ridiculous. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Which, by the way, is going to come up in the clip because just as a little preview, the first thing Ben Shapiro is going to say in this clip is as a Jew, right? So you should trust him about what is and isn't anti-Semitism. You should defer to him because he's a member of this traditionally oppressed group.
Just like he does when black people talk about racism.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah,
this is...
Right. Oh, yeah. He does that nice defer there.
Yeah, this is a guy who, like, half of his grift is rolling his eyes when anybody says this about any other group. That,
exactly.
If black people, if Native Americans, if gay people, if anybody says, oh, wait a second, this is really bigoted and this, I'm saying this because of my experiences as a blank, Ben Shapiro will be the first to tell you as a blank, right? Doesn't matter. That, that just, do you have a good argument? Do you not? Right. But here he is resting on, as a Jew, I can tell you that, that this is anti-Semitism. And of course, some people on the left are just as hypocritical about it because they're far too willing to do the epistemic deference game in other cases, but they rightly resist it in this case. But I think the right way to resolve the inconsistency is let's move away from that across the board, right? That, whether or not you're Jewish should have nothing to do with whether or not you're right when you make a point about Palestinian human rights, just like whether or not you're an Arab or a Muslim should have nothing to do with anything when you're talking about Saudi human rights abuses.
Right.
So the response of some Ben Shapiro fan within a couple hours of this video going up was to file a complaint to YouTube that this was hate speech. And they flagged it. They set it so they disabled comments. They disabled sharing. You couldn't even watch it without clicking through I understand that this might be offensive.
Let me just say that TMBS is strongly supportive of the safety and well-being of the state of Israel. And I've been thinking long and hard about this as a Jew. And don't flag this video.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Well,
I apologize on behalf of Ben.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah. This is an issue that is very sensitive to me.
Can I get a little solidarity from Griscom?
I'm not touching.
Come on, Griscom. This is Griscom doing McConaughey for Palestinians.
So, so what you should, so when this happened, now YouTube does allow you one appeal.
Right.
And so Doug, our editor at Zero Books, who runs the YouTube channel, and he edits the videos. So he submitted the little paragraph they let you submit for your appeal. And my assumption at the time was, okay, this is incredibly annoying, but as soon as any actual human being works for YouTube, watches this video, all of these restrictions are going to be lifted, because of course they are, because this is ridiculously anodyne, right? You know, there's nothing that I say in that video that 100 left-wing podcasts that I listen to haven't said about these same issues.
Or frankly, even Fareed Zakaria or David Rothkopf. This was a very chill, very...
Yeah, I mean, so in the video...
I watched about 3 minutes of it because we were, in Puerto Rico. But
sure. There was the...
Yeah.
So in the video, I'm making flame-throwing points hey, Ben Shapiro says that if you cared about Judaism or Israel, you would vote Republican. But what about all of the, the Jewish leftists, over the years who draw from the Jewish religious tradition, like Abraham Joshua Heschel or Michael Lerner or people like this.
Flag it.
And so it's okay, nobody could possibly actually watch this video and continue to believe that it's hate speech. Which is why I was really surprised the next morning when they said they'd reviewed the one appeal and they'd upheld the original decision. I was thinking, what could have possibly happened here? And then, of course, I realized that probably what it was is that, now we don't know, this is all speculation, which is a big part of the problem, that, that there's no transparency whatsoever here. There's, you could only guess, it's like when TMBS was trying to get monetized and there was that whole thing going on. You could only guess what's going on the other end of the curtain, which, by the way, I think is a big problem. And I think that this is something that should cause a lot of people on the left to think harder about how flippant that some of us have been when we see right-wing charlatans, like Alex Jones, who's a deeply horrible person, get kicked off all these tech platforms. And you could even make a case that was the right result because of his harassment of the Sandy Hook parents, because he's selling all kinds of pseudo-medical gobbledygook. But it should be disturbing that an incredibly popular commentator could just get kicked off with no clear, no clearly stated rationale, no meaningful due process.
Of course.
Given that these are platforms that we all rely, in practice, YouTube has a lot more control than the government does over the flow of information. And I think it's a real mistake for leftists to buy into this legalistic libertarian definition of free speech that, if it's a corporation doing it, not the government, don't worry about it, right? There's nothing to see here. In fact, I think our response should be that we should advocate nationalizing these big tech platforms so that we can have due process and meaningful free speech protections. But of course, realistically, I'm sure what happened was that there's some overworked, underpaid YouTube employee who was tasked that morning with looking at 20 videos that had been flagged.
And is told, don't rock the boat.
Exactly.
This is not about editorial analysis. This is causing as little stress for us as possible.
Exactly.
That's the point.
They want to cause relatively few ripples.
Right.
And so they see it's this, and whatever. I mean, it's Zero Books does okay. And I've done videos for them that have gotten tens of thousands of views. But it's a relatively small YouTube channel. So it's a relatively small YouTube channel. They see the words Israel, Jews, in the title. And then says okay, whatever, upheld, right?
Yeah,
it's probably
don't use those words.
Which
that's definitely
which is the takeaway. But there's something really disturbing about that. I remember thinking that because I was on the phone with you after all this happened. You were like, oh yeah, no, you gotta you can't use those titles. You have to, you were talking about.
You're revealing my strategic analysis behind the scenes. I like it.
Yeah.
Talk about how I operate, Ben.
Yeah. So gonna continue to throw Michael under the bus here.
What did I say? No, this makes me sound. I think it makes sense.
No. I mean, it was good rational advice. You said, hey, we just did a video on the one-state solution. We called it Democracy in the Middle East. And it's like, okay, fair enough.
Right.
Because like the reality being the way it is, the way that YouTube handles these things, that is probably good advice. But there's something a little bit disturbing about the fact that this is like, we're having this conversation, like we're trying to like get this past the censorship office and the authoritarian regime. You know, it's like, oh, no. You can criticize the general secretary, but like you can't use his name or else they'll know that you're criticizing him, right? So what you have to say is like certain comrades have said, you know?
And they really have. Speaking of which, we have a Ben Shapiro clip that, and again, you're just going to do 2 of these clips and it's just going to be, if we stipulate that it's aesthetically, morally repugnant, and that we have different moral starting points, you're going to show us how to argue it out. So we'll start. This is Ben Shapiro talking about Israel and identity, ironically.
So Ilhan Omar tweeted out, quote, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," with a little music symbol. Now, as a Jew, one of the oft-used anti-Semitic tropes, I mean, this has been true for thousands of years, is that the Jews control the monetary systems with their shekels, that the Jews are an evil, nefarious force behind world events spreading around money, and that the reason that people support the Jews is because they've been corrupted by the Jew gold. It's been the Jew gold behind Republican support for the state of Israel.
Pause it. The way Ben Shapiro says Jew gold is very triggering to me, and I want to flag that video for unintentional anti-Semitism, but go ahead.
Which, of course, is a complete lie. The vast majority of Americans support Israel and support Jews because they're not anti-Semitic and because they recognize that Israel is fighting against some of the worst people on planet Earth. And it isn't really a hard choice when you have a choice between democratic country that respects individual rights and evil Islamist dictatorship that tries to murder civilians in their bed.
Okay, Ben, logical analysis. Go.
All right. So... Of course, you shouldn't let that go by without correcting his bizarre characterization of Israel-Palestine. That you talk, when you say, oh, there's this democratic state that respects equal rights and everything. Well, hold on, right? That's certainly not true for Palestinian residents of the West Bank, settlers who live in the same areas can vote in Israeli elections. They certainly can't. They're denied basic legal, moral, and human rights in all sorts of ways. And even Palestinians on the other end of the Green Line who are Israeli citizens have been openly discriminated against institutionally. Not even in a, we might talk about structural racism or things being objectively unequal, but in a de jure institutional way since the foundation of the State of Israel, that this is literally a country that makes its citizens have ID cards that say what their ethnic group is on. Right? So that's just bizarre. But on a logical level, one thing to notice here, and this is worth noting about this video, but also that this is kind of Ben Shapiro's trademark, is that he's using what's called the false dilemma fallacy, which...
Ooh, can I have my board, please? Wow. Wait, what was that again?
It's the false dilemma fallacy, which...
Did you get the Perry Mason? Yeah, we need it high. Oh, that's as high as it goes? The false dilemma fallacy.
Nice.
Fanfare. All right, go ahead.
So false dilemma fallacy saying, hey, there are only 2 options, so if you don't support this one, you have to support the other one. Right. And the reason...
The right uses this like all the time.
Oh, yeah.
This is their bread and butter of argument right here.
Oh, absolutely. And Shapiro in particular uses it all the time. Like, if he stopped using this, he'd more or less have to stop talking. And this is, I think, a particularly blatant example, but Shapiro, because he's loud and he talks fast and he sounds really confident, which is all that the people who respond to his videos, that they love all these videos. Ben Shapiro destroys liberal snowflake. That's all they're responding to, really. That he's saying things they like, he's talking fast, and he sounds confident. But this is such a blatant example of this logical fallacy, this mistaken reasoning, because he's saying, here are your choices. You can support the Israeli state and what it does to the Palestinians. That's one choice. Or you can support Hamas.
Right.
That's it. Those are the only options.
Right.
So not only does that erase the sort of position that I'd have or you'd have that, that we should, the ideal solution would actually be a one singular secular democratic state with equal rights for everybody and full religious and cultural rights, for all groups. But that's neither supporting Netanyahu nor supporting Hamas. But
ideally, both Hamas and Netanyahu would lose very soundly in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I think that's probably a safe bet that if you had to rely on the votes of millions of Israeli Jews to win a national election, Hamas would not win.
Right.
And if you had to rely on the votes of
Likud is done.
These increased millions of Arabs, Likud is certainly done.
Right.
But look, even forget that position for a second. I think that's the correct position. But even if you have the sort of liberal Zionist position that says that, okay, Israel should continue to be defined specifically as a Jewish state, and we should make sure it has a Jewish majority forever, but the occupation is bad, and maybe the U.S. should still be pressuring Israel to make certain concessions for the sake of a two-state solution, which, by the way, what I've just described is the majority position among Americans and the majority position among American Jews.
Right.
Which is something that gets left out a lot of this conversation about Ilhan Omar and anti-Semitism, that most American Jews are closer to Ilhan Omar's actual position than they are to the AIPAC Ben Shapiro position.
Definitely.
The polling is very clear on this, that most Americans, and look, American Jews have the same positions on this in polls as Americans in general do. There's no particular daylight there, and most of them do think that the U.S. should have a more neutral role in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. But instead of arguing against that, because Shapiro doesn't have a good argument against it, and on some level he knows that, he's just excluding it in advance from consideration. That
right.
That we're not gonna, he's not gonna have an argument against that sort of cosmopolitan secular one-state solution. He's not even gonna make an argument against a liberal Zionist two-state solution. He's just going to exclude those in advance. So either you agree with him that the Palestinians should continue to be brutalized and humiliated in the way they are, or you agree with Hamas. Those are the only options. And I think once you realize that that's what he's saying, then I think it even a lot of people who might be swayed by this argument, right? And don't get me wrong, I am under no illusion whatsoever that the most hardcore Ben Shapiro fans are going to be convinced by anything that some nerdy little college, Marxist college professor like me says ever, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the point. But the point is this: that when the only ways that we have to respond to these bad right-wing arguments are either mockery, which I've already indicated I'm not entirely opposed to. I think it has, there's a very legitimate role that it has, or moral condemnation, which I'm also not opposed to. I think that these, like Ben Shapiro, actually is an objectively horrible person who's making the world a worse place, and there's nothing wrong with saying that. But when our only responses are mockery or moral condemnation, when those are the only weapons in our arsenal, then that's bad, both because of those winnable people that we talked about earlier, that anybody who is sitting on the fence will eventually get the impression that you don't actually have a response to the argument,
right.
And that's a very bad look. And even just on a shaved ape dominance game level, that's a very bad move. That's a very weak move. And two, when we move from arguments with the dregs of humanity like Ben Shapiro to arguments among good people about how to achieve our shared goals, if we get ourselves used to only relying on mockery and moral condemnation, then inevitably those are the tools that we're going to turn on each other, which I've got to say, every time I log into Twitter, I see a lot of evidence of that in terms of how intra-left debates are conducted.
Super toxic and unhelpful. Yeah. You just enjoyed that Michael Brooks Show video, and you can get a lot more by subscribing to us here at the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. It's literally right there.